Hi and welcome to this video in the QPSMR Companion CATI Up and Running series. And in this short video we're just going to take you through the steps that you need to follow to prepare your questionnaire so that it can be used by interviewers to carry out a collection on the telephone. So a couple of things to say before we start. Now, you need to be prepared to have all your questionnaire ready. So by a prepared questionnaire here, I mean that you've got in here the data coming from the sample file. So we've got these fields here: name, address, postcode, member, event, and of course the telephone number. You are allowed up to 3 different telephone numbers in that file for contact, which can be called telnum _1 _2 and _3, but just telnum on its own means you have 1 number. And then we have down here the questionnaire itself. You can see that between the TTT _start Q, which has the questions, Q1, Q2, and so on. And it ends here at Q13 with TTT _end Q. And then we've got some more ZZ entries around it. Now that looks like a typical questionnaire that's ready for being used as a telephone interview. You will need your interviewers to have the Telin software installed on their computer so that they can use Telin, because you don't want or don't wish to have your telephone interviewers using the full system, because they could change the questionnaire, they could get into all sorts of parts of the program that you don't want to get into. You just want them to conduct the surveys. And typically, if you're doing telephone interviewing, you will have already gone through the process of preparing the questionnaire so that you've got any quotas ready and your sample data that you're going to get your interviewers or the people you're going to call has already been loaded. Now, if you're not familiar with those, there's a video that takes you through in this series on preparing quotas and preparing your sample so that it's ready to be used by the interviewers. So you should have again performed those 2 steps so that you're ready now to give this project to your interviewers. So what do we do to do that? Well, we go to the bottom item on the CATI menu, which is make a QIF file for classic Telin. So we click on that and it will default to telephone input, and there's the project title. Now typically here you will use a sample file, so we can choose to use the full paths if we're going to move this around this project, so we can check on that box. We can use the sample file, so that was already made, so we just click on that and that's where our sample's coming from. So say that's covered in a separate video. If we've got quotas, we will select the quota file, which must be the name. The project here is called Project Action, so that's Project Action quota.csv. We need to name the data file that we're going to store our main data in. Just to remind you how that works. So your data from the sample file typically sits in a, let's call it Project Action sample.asc. So that's got any information about your sample, any demographics perhaps you've got about them, and the telephone number. In here, we're going to store all of the other data. So that includes all the ZZ entries and all the survey data. So it's sort of going to, the main file will have the added data from the sample file, but only for those records that completed an interview. So for those records in here that we don't get interviews or the numbers unobtainable, all those sorts of outcomes that can happen in a telephone survey, they don't find their way through to the main. These are completed records in here with any data that's come through from the sample file. We're going to issue serial numbers and we're going to save this file in the input subfolder. So here we go, and I click OK, and now I'm ready to move this so that my interviewers can use Telin to access this, and I can move these files now to where I want to if I've stored the full path. The typical way that someone works is that they store the QIF and the QSN on their own computer and the rest sits on a server that everybody can access. So if I've got that ready, I should be able to now conduct interviewing using Telin, provided I've got the Telin software loaded on my interviewer computers. A supervisor, if they want to conduct any interviews, they can do them using either Tellin or they can do it in the main QPS software. So we click on here, click OK, it's just checking my versioning there, and I'm ready now to proceed. Now, a supervisor will typically say, well, just go and get a record from the sample. This project's got 30 records in the sample file. It has got some quotas, but I can just click on this and they can then start their interviewing. It could be that it's been set up so that they can only get access to SOAR. They won't have access to certain people, such as members and non-members, that satisfy the quotas, so that we can boost quotas or catch up with quotas that are falling behind. Typically, before you deploy this, you're going to want to go through a test input phase. This looks like exactly like conducting an interview, which is covered in the video on using Tellin, which is a separate video which follows. But it's just exactly the same, except the screens are red so that it's clear that you're in test mode and you're not actually conducting a live interview. So that completes this video on preparing the files. You're now ready to pass these files to interviewers, and we're going to look at that in the next video, actually using the software to conduct an interview. Thanks for joining me.